Good afternoon, everybody. In New York, it's 1 o'clock. I'm not sure what time it is in Abu Dhabi, but in New York, it's 1 o'clock. Hope you're having a wonderful Mother's Day. We just finished celebrating Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israel's Independence Day, and it's been 74 years since that remarkable day of the establishment of the state of Israel. And even though the creation of the state is truly a wondrous and miraculous event in which the hand of Hashem was most definitely evident, what has transpired in the land of Israel over the past few decades is also truly remarkable. The country is no longer a fledgling operation in which asks people to make a sacrifice when deciding to move there and to live there. Today, it's a thriving country with business development and very high-end living and advanced society. And one of the individuals who is playing his role in developing this remarkable country is our guest speaker today, Michael Eisenberg. Michael grew up here in Manhattan. Where'd you go to school, Michael? In Ramaz?
No, I went to Manhattan Day School and to MTA.
Oh, very nice. I'm also an MTA graduate, yeah. So Michael grew up here.
None of us are perfect.
Yeah. Grew up in Manhattan, studied in yeshiva throughout his younger years in Gush Etzion in Israel, in Yeshiva University. In 1993, he made Aliyah with his wife. Currently lives in Yerushalayim with 8 children. He is the co-founder and general partner of Aleph, a Tel Aviv-based venture capital firm, which specializes in partnering with Israeli entrepreneurs to build successful companies and brands. Since its founding in 2013, Aleph has invested in over 50 companies with 850 million under management. And prior to Aleph, Michael worked as a general partner at Benchmark Capital, which he joined in July 2005. And where he continues as a partner responsible for Benchmark's Israeli portfolio. Since 2006, Michael has been writing a blog, 6 Kids and a Full-Time Job, which sounds like it's an outdated title, 6 Kids and a Full-Time Job, on topics ranging from politics, technology, and Judaism, and macroeconomics. He was a contributor to The Marker, a Hebrew language daily business newspaper. He has published numerous books, including The Tree of Life and Prosperity, which we'll discuss, I think, a little bit today. He lectures frequently on venture capital, Israel, and entrepreneurship. He serves as chairman of Shomer HaChadash and on the board of Gush Yeshivat Har Etzion in the Gush, a non-profit organization and a very influential yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael. It's a great honor to call upon Michael Eisenberg and Jacob Gold, president of Fifth Avenue Synagogue, who will be conducting this afternoon's discussion.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. Thank you, Michael, for joining. I know you have a busy schedule. I want to wish everyone happy Mother's Day. I think, Michael, when you and I chose the date, we didn't realize it was Mother's Day, but we still have a lot of people attending and we're recording it. So either way, didn't want to reschedule today. So Michael, you were saying that you grew up in the city and you went to MDS and MTA. If you could just tell us a little bit about your background. I'm trying to segue in how you got into venture capital. So if you could take us back a little bit, I'd appreciate it. And also, moving to Israel, at what age, and give us a little background, please. Thank you, Michael.
Sure. Thank you for having me, Rabbi Babbage and Jacob. I appreciate it. I'll add that among my most memorable, days in the 9th grade of MTA was Mother's Day, when only half of the Talmidim showed up for Rabbi Yitzchak Cohen's shir. And when he looked around the room, he said, "I don't understand. Every day is Mother's Day. Where are the Talmidim?" Turns out that most mothers didn't think that every day was Mother's Day and kept their kids home, but Rabbi Cohen did. And so I grew up on the West Side, on the Upper West Side on 86th Street, like the rabbi said, Manhattan Day School, MTA, and I started YU. And after my freshman year of YU, I went to the Gush. That was 1989. 1 year turned into 2. The first Gulf War happened. if you recall, at the beginning of 1991 and ended on Purim of 1991. And I found myself about a week later in a room in the yeshiva with Rav Yehuda Amital, who was one of the two Roshei Yeshiva. Rav Aaron Lichtenstein was the other. And candidly, at that time, I had almost zero relationship with Rav Amital. I spent my time in yeshiva becoming close with Rav Aaron Lichtenstein. And he was the reason I went to the Gush. And with 15 other Talmidim in the room, I asked Rav Amital the following question. Is there a bigger mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, of settling the land of Israel, if I make Aliyah and settle in the Negev, the Galil, Yudav Shomron, wherever, basically a place that's unpopulated, or is it the same mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael if I settle in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv? And he looked at me and he said, Akosh Duyot, that's complete nonsense, absolute nonsense. You need to make Aliyah and open a factory that will employ 10,000 people to earn an honest and decent living. That would be the biggest mitzvah. He said it in Hebrew. That's my translation into English. And the biggest mitzvah is to enable other people to earn an honest and decent living. And it had a huge impression on me. It was the first time I had heard any rabbi, certainly from my time at MTH University, talk about the economy and talk about business in that way, and really put a Torah perspective on business and vice versa, a business perspective on Torah. An economic perspective on Torah and how important that is to the land of Israel. Basically, on the spot, I decided I would make Aliyah. It took me 2 more years. I came back to YU to finish up. And then after graduating, I believe it was like May 31st, 1993. And then I got married on June 13th, 1993. That date I do remember. We made Aliyah on August 11th. And I've been in Israel ever since. I started my career in political consulting. I discovered, unlike the famous "you didn't build that" comment of one of the United States presidents, I discovered that in politics they don't build a whole lot. And if I was going to help employ 10,000 people to earn an honest and decent living, doing political consulting was not going to be the ticket to that. So after about 1.5 years and getting fired, by the way, Rabbi Babbage mentioned that the economy in Israel has changed, which it has. I'm sure we'll talk more about that. But at the time, I was actually laid off by the political consulting firm, which is based in Boston, and had 1 child. And I'd like to say, out of some level of resourcefulness and desperation, or a combination of the two, I ended up starting a tech merchant bank, which is the first of its kind in Israel, together with a partner named Shlomo. And we were very fortunate that the first internet bubble came along and made us, I guess, look smart. And we did well in the late 90s, investing in tech or doing deals in tech. And then I was recruited into a venture capital fund. That's what I've basically been doing since 1997 at 3 different firms, first at Israel Seed Partners, and then at Benchmark Capital, the point you made earlier, and then together with my partner, Aidan Shochat, now 2 more partners, we started Aleph in 2013. And the Israeli tech industry really got started in the early 90s, and I was very fortunate enough to kind of be in the right place at the right time, as the economy here has really just taken off in the last 25 years.
So Michael, you said a lot. So first of all, just curious, your family, I assume, must have been Zionistic, but I mean, that's pretty incredible that you're learning in Israel, you're single, and you decide your second year that you're living in Israel. So that's a pretty incredible story. Was it something in your family or education before, or just happened that year? Can you give us a little background on that?
My family are all Zionists, and we're Zionists. My grandparents, my parents, etc. But I had a couple of aunts who had moved, but nobody who had moved yet. And so it was, a little bit. The rabbi mentioned Yom Ha'atzmaut, the 74th Yom Ha'atzmaut. A little bit, I think, that if one has a belief in Jewish history and Jewish destiny, and one has a belief that things don't happen by accident, and God has kind of enabled us to live in the land that our forefathers, my great-grandfather, for sure, my grandfather would have given an arm and a leg for. My great-grandfather walked across, after he got smicha from Rav Shimon Shkop, he walked back across Europe to get smicha from a Zionist rabbi, Rav Reinus, and had a wide correspondence with Ben Gurion and the Chafetz Chaim and other people, he wrote a book called Or Geulat Yisrael, the light of the redemption of Israel. And he would have given an arm and a leg to live in Israel. And we're so privileged to have that opportunity now. I feel you'll excuse me for all the listeners here from the East Side, but I think it's almost like, how could you not move to Israel at this time? Why wait? Well, what are we waiting for? People throughout the generations, whether it was before 1492, the Ramban went, others didn't, before the Holocaust, we've had opportunities to come and make it into a wonderful place. And I think, the country's getting immensely better. The economy is roaring now. And that comes from people bringing their talents and skills. And the same thing happened, by the way, at the beginning of the Second Temple by Sheni, where very few people came with Zerubbabel ben Shaltiel, and then with Ezra. It was a minority of the population that was in Bavel in Babylonia at the time. And it took a while, but that really established all Jewish culture we know of today, right? Whether it's the holiday of Hanukkah or the Mishnah. And if you think about today, by the way, Jewish culture is being made in Israel, by the way, and that's everything from Torah. The rabbis in America will excuse me, but all the innovation in Torah is coming out of Israel at this point. And it's true in culture too. Everything from the food that people are enjoying in New York and in Paris and in London comes out. And things like Fauda, even on Netflix, and obviously the technology and the Torah. And so, you got to be in it to win it. So come be a part.
Okay, I appreciate that. So tell us again, you were doing the political job. The company was based in Boston, but I assume you were working in Israel, or you were living in Israel, working for a company in Boston in politics originally, correct? And then you were let go. Then you meet Shlomo Kalish. I haven't heard his name in a while, but he was a big tech guru in the day. And you guys started, explain that tech merchant bank so people understand it, please.
So Shlomo had a consulting company called Jerusalem Global Consultants, which, he was a professor at the time at Tel Aviv University, had been at Rochester and MIT Sloan. And he was advising Israeli tech companies on business strategy. It turns out that giving advice to Israelis is not terribly remunerative. Certainly at the time. It's become more remunerative now since McKinsey's turned up. But at the time, it certainly wasn't. And as I was gainfully unemployed and had somehow persuaded a investment bank called Montgomery Securities in San Francisco to let me represent them in Israel. And so they gave me a contract, and I traded my contract with Shlomo for a portion of his business. And now we had a business model, and he had contacts, and he actually knew something. I didn't know anything. And we began to do deals. And we did two kinds of deals. We did some deals where we invested a little bit of money and then raised more money. That's like the merchant banking piece of it. In reality, in those early days, we just reinvested our fee because we had no money. And then at the same time, we helped together with Montgomery take Israeli companies public on NASDAQ, in which was really kind of the first big wave of Israeli IPOs in the late 90s, and kind of opened the door for many, many more. And so that's what we did. And that was, that went well for a while. Like I said, the bubble was very kind to us. I'd like to say we were smart. In reality, I think we were blessed.
So I met you, I think, on the last Asia Torah trip with David Cowan, if you remember. I don't know if you went on all the trips, but Eric Greenberg, it was the last.
Eric Greenberg from Scient and Viant, it was right there.
I'm sorry?
Eric Greenberg from Scient.
Yeah, that was the year after Howard Schultz had gone, and those were great trips. Yeah. So you were then at Israel Seed at that time?
I think so. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so you went from the merchant bank, Israel Seed. Tell us about Israel Seed, and then sort of walk us through a benchmark, how they're all different.
Yeah, so John Medved and Neil Cohen, who started Israel Seed, were kind enough to take me in as their partner. Small fund based in Jerusalem, both at Jerusalem Global and at Israel Seed, I did a lot of the early internet deals in Israel. There were very few people who knew what the internet was in the mid-90s in Israel, and I was fortunate to know a tiny bit about it. And so I did a bunch of those deals. They went reasonably well, some of them, others less well, as is the nature of the venture capital business. And so I did that until 2005, from 97 to 2005. And I'd done a deal with Benchmark where one of my companies acquired one of theirs. And Bill Gurley, who some of you may know, is probably one of the most famous venture capitalists in the world. And I served as co-lead directors at a company. And at some point,
he's actually more famous, not to interrupt you, because of the show Super Pumped. So everyone knows who he is now. If you've seen the show about Uber, I don't know if you watched.
I've not seen the show about Uber. I was there live when Uber happened at Benchmark, but I have not seen the show.
Yeah, so it's about Bill Gurley, but he's a main part of the show. Either way,
he's a tremendous mention, a brilliant man, and a good friend, and a man of unbelievable values, and sees the world straight. And so anyway, he and I were co-lead directors at this company called shopping.com. And at some point he turned to me and said, "Hey, we've got this fund in Israel. You really ought to come join it." It took a while, but it ended up happening. And so that was, very fortunate. I got to sit around the table with some of the smartest people in the venture business and just try to absorb whatever I could, just tremendously morally upstanding, ethically upstanding people who are amazing investors.
So again, you started the Benchmark office in Israel, is that correct?
No, I didn't. I joined it. There were 3 partners on the ground already, and I joined.
Okay, got it. So you're a Benchmark. This is 95 till
this is 2005. 2005.
2005. I'm sorry, 2005. And you're there for how many years at Benchmark, give or take? 8 years?
Depending on how you count it, let's say call it 8 years. Yeah.
Okay, got it. So just Israel Seed and Benchmark. I'm sure you're doing bigger dollar deals at Benchmark, or how would you compare the two funds? Was Israel Seed smaller?
Israel Seed was smaller, but I wouldn't say the deals were much bigger. When you invest in seed stage or Series A venture capital, you're writing small checks, and Benchmark has always been a contrarian, and the same thing is true at Aleph. It was true at Israel Seed, which is when you see all these venture capital funds raising these mega funds now, when they zig, we always zag, which is we believe this is a craft business, small partnerships with relatively small dollars under management. Benchmark has raised one after another $450 million funds and has not increased fund size. And we believe it's a multiples on capital business, and you got to invest very early, seed and Series A, and help the entrepreneur build his company. And that's where the big upside in this model comes from, because it turns out that a lot of companies go out of business, in the venture capital world. So you need some mighty home runs or grand slams to make up for them.
So walk us through that. So when you do a Series A deal, I assume you save money to invest in a Series B, or do you just let them do their own thing? How does that work professionally?
Generally, both at Benchmark and at Aleph, we've invested in 1, maybe 2 rounds, and then bring in other people. We play well in the sandbox and partner up with a lot of later stage funds who want to invest alongside of us, because we're not fighting with them for allocation in later rounds. We try really hard to play nice in the sandbox and just stick to our knitting, invest early, be company builders alongside the founders who are the real kind of drivers of success in these cases.
Right. And the venture capital model, if you invest in 10 deals, realistically, you hope that 3 work?
Well, the historic
hope all 10 work. But what's realistic?
Yeah, the historic math says something like this. If you're good at this business, then one company returns 10, but in reality it needs to return 20, 25x on the money. Another 3 give you, 2 to 5x back. One gives you your money back, and you lose your money on the rest of the investments, or maybe get some percentage of it back. That's historical math. Unfortunately, somehow in the last 10 years, you got a lot of people who've forgotten that math, and now they're getting a pretty rude awakening as the market's turned in the last 4 or 5 months, and reality has come back. And I think there's a lot of people about to learn some hard lessons, and some of them are already learning it. There's a spreadsheet you can find online called layoffs.fyi or something like that, which is all the layoffs in tech in the last 2 or 3 months, and it's brutal. And I don't think we've started yet. And so the math is coming back, and the math I described is coming back into vogue. Bill Gurley and I did a podcast together with a guy named Harry Stebbings. Harry Stebbings has probably the best venture capital podcast out there. It's called the 20-Minute VC. And Bill Gurley and I did an episode in early November, basically saying that, this market was about to turn, and people in for a rude awakening. And unfortunately, it came true, and it's coming true. And I think, unfortunately, we're right at the beginning.
So if you're investing now in companies, you're probably getting valuations that you like. In other words, when the market's down, when everyone's scared, that's actually when you make money. That's what Warren Buffett always says. So you're probably seeing good opportunities now.
Warren Buffett's not exactly our business. There's a lot of principles of Warren Buffett that are true, but our issue is upside, not the price we pay for the most part. It doesn't mean the price doesn't matter. It matters somewhat, but really how big the ultimate outcome in the venture business matters more, because you can get stuff that's 100x, 200x if you get it right. And so, Uber was a monster success for Benchmark, and Shopify has been a bunch of Wix. There have been a bunch of very meaningful companies that have been created over time that have significant multiples in capital, and that's what you're playing for in this business. In the venture business, you can only lose your money once in each of these bets, and it's a portfolio approach. But
you're not scared because the market's down. That doesn't preclude you from continuing to invest, right? Because you're investing over the long term in sectors.
Quite the contrary. Innovation is very constant. Markets go up, markets go down. These are long-term investments. You're in these companies anywhere between 5 and 15 years. And so you can't look at the NASDAQ or the Dow today or the S&P. You're betting on a journey and a trend shift and a technology shift and an innovation that the world doesn't know, and they play out over a long period of time. But we're all human, and a lot of people get overwhelmed by both the time they have to spend fixing their existing investments and the market psychology. And so I find a lot of people clam up during these times. It's one of my favorite times to invest.
Okay, great. That's good to hear. So are there sectors that you like more than others? Or are you just opportunistic on a personal level?
My sector is Israel, and
okay.
I made a long bet on Israel, and I'm long Israel, and that's enough of kind of a containment strategy for not going all over the place. And so that's my focus. Got
it. So all of your investments, to be clear, they're founded in Israel. Like you all, Uber was not an Israeli deal, right? But you said,
but Benchmark was in the U.S., and that was actually Bill Gurley's deal, and the Benchmark U.S. guys. What I do is Israel.
Got it. But
Israel, what they call Israel, Israelis in Israel. I know set something up in Israel. But yeah.
Got it. So your fund now compared to Benchmark, is it a fund that you started on your own, or how's it different?
I started with my partner, Eitan Shochat. Yeah, Eitan Shochat and I started the fund in 2013.
Got it.
And we've now raised 4 funds. You raise them every 2-3 years, and now we have 4 partners, and it's an equal partnership, just like Benchmark was. There are no analysts, no associates. An entrepreneur meets one of the partners who can write a check.
Got it. So how many each of your portfolio companies? One of your partners, or you sit on the board, or how do you structure that?
That's correct. Yeah.
So you're on the board of how many companies at one time, give or take?
Somewhere between 10 and 15 generally. Okay,
got it. So in general, the Israeli economy has done well since you've been in Israel, as you said earlier. Tell us some of the big changes over the last, 20 years or so in Israel. I mean, was Intel there? Was Google there when you got there? No. So I assume there's some dramatic changes, right?
Intel, I believe, was. Intel definitely was. Motorola was, et cetera. But, everyone's turned up, everything from Facebook to Intuit to Salesforce.com to Google. Apple's got a huge facility in Israel. And at the same time, there's more entrepreneurship generally. And so there's a tremendous amount of startups and companies that become worth more money as they go public. And in general, I think the Israeli economy is good at multidisciplinary innovation and doing different things. And it's, I think someone told me, I haven't seen the number myself, but someone told me on Thursday that we crossed Germany in GDP per capita. which is pretty stunning. And it kind of continued to climb up the list. Unfortunately or fortunately, Tel Aviv is the most expensive city in the world, according to The Economist. And so, the economy's become freer, more open as time goes on. And I think the other thing that I was going for, and I there's a lot of what I catalog in my books, because I think a lot of it is derived from the Torah, is there is a sort of mutual responsibility and an empowerment ethos that is mutual among Israelis and in the economy. That same request of Rav Amital to come to Israel and set up a factory to employ 10,000 people to earn an honest and decent living animates many people in Israel. And so you'll see amazing things. You've got these Israeli companies doing training programs to bring in Haredim or Ethiopians or other people and teach them coding and data analytics and a bunch of other things. Wix has got a program like that. Lemonade's got a program like that. AppsFlyer's got a program like that. And at the same time, I remember very clearly one of my companies, which actually had another Israeli competitor, got attacked by the Free Syrian Army. It has cyber attack from the Free Syrian Army. And literally over the weekend, the competitive company sent their experts and their X8200 guys also to kind of help defend this company from the attack. That's just an unbelievable kind of what they call here acharut hadadit, or mutual responsibility, or shevet achim gam yachad. And I think is really unique to Israel and empowering and inspiring. And I think it's really the ethos that we need to strive for in Israel, and strive to expand that to other sectors of the economy as well.
Great. To talk about, I'm sure you know Andy Neff, but I met with him years ago. He was trying to create like an MIT type environment in Israel. Are there, I know you get a lot of good tech people out of the Israeli army, of course, security people, but education-wise, are there top, technology educational schools in Israel or not yet?
I mean, the Technion is one of the world's greatest technology institutions, and Cornell partnered with them, right? So now they're in New York too, and I think it's Guangzhou University in China, and obviously the Weizmann Institute is one of the 4 or 5 top universities and science universities in the world. And so there's a lot going on here in university education and research in particular. But the Army is still the engine of technology growth here.
I'm sorry, say that again. I missed you.
The Army is still the main engine of technology growth. Yeah.
Got it. Someone had already asked. So are you? Can you comment on the crypto market? Is that something you're dabbling in or you're avoiding?
No, I'm definitely not avoiding it. I've, in fact, the only 2 investments I've made over the last 14 or 15 months were in what we call now Web3 companies. One team that I've incubated for almost 2 years and worked with on an idea, and the other one doing something kind of broadly in trying to disrupt Facebook in the advertising space using crypto. And so no, we've been at that. You can see the company powering, by the way, many of these city coins that you're starting to see pop up in Boston, and I think it's Dayton, Ohio, or Akron, Ohio, and a bunch of other cities around America. Is powered by a company of ours that we actually funded in 2014. And it took time for the market to catch up with it. They were probably 5 or 6 years early to the market, but they husbanded their cash and did really well. The company's called Kolu. The protocol that they operate is called Urban Protocol. So we've done a bunch of this, and it's been very rewarding. I'm myself a very early crypto investor, as is my partner Eden. So it was actually something we set out to do already in 2013.
Great, that's exciting. So maybe for those.
Jacob, can I add one thing?
Please.
I think if somebody's asking about crypto knows about it, I think there's an interesting thought experiment here, which is if we believe that the Jewish people and the Torah have a unique set of values that are important to us, could you code a smart contract that made us track to those values in our various tokenization or economic efforts? That is an idea that I am toying with. Is there a coin we can create that will unite the Jewish people globally in an economic endeavor? I think these are interesting questions for people to think about.
That is interesting. Thanks for sharing that. Can you, I've known you for a while and you have a stellar reputation, but I'm just curious for those on the webinar and they'll be listening to this today, how do you differentiate yourself or your fund? Like if someone's on the call and they're looking for a venture capitalist, how do you differentiate yourself from other venture capitalists in Israel?
I'd say two things. One is we've actually invested a huge amount of money in software. We have engineers and product people on staff, and we've built probably the largest database in the Middle East, in Israel, and maybe in the US of tech talent and people who can kind of come in. And since the most scarce resource is actually not money, but talent, we help companies get talent quickly, and that's a huge competitive advantage. But I'd like to think, at least on a personal level and on a fund level as well, that the values that animate us, and like I said, a lot of this I cover in the book of aligning really business and values and ethics, and using those core business models to drive a value-based framework, not some kind of woke capitalism thing, but the core business models to drive them is something that differentiates us, and a willingness to go on a limb about that, I think, inspires a lot of entrepreneurs, and we hope they work with us, and we'll win some and we'll lose some.
Okay, appreciate that. So you mentioned you're in Abu Dhabi now. Talk a little bit about Abu Dhabi, Israel, your involvement, what you're comfortable sharing for those that haven't been there, and educate us what's happening.
I was fortunate enough to come on the first trip after the Abraham Accords. The secretary at the time, Secretary Mnuchin, and brought people from the US and Israel and business leaders in the Emirates together at a conference here in Abu Dhabi. It was my first trip during COVID too. And it was like a reunion of long lost cousins, incredibly warm people. And I wrote an article, actually, you can find it on Kalkalist in English and Hebrew, which is one of the Israeli business sites, saying how there's a lot of people kind of rushing to do business here, but in reality, it takes time to build trust. And we haven't been connected for many decades, and we need to build a lot of trust with our counterparties and colleagues here in the Emirates. And I found just an unbelievably welcoming and warm environment. I came in again today. Like I said, I got to my hotel room 5 minutes before getting on the Zoom. I always find the people here welcoming and just wonderful. And it was reported in the Wall Street Journal that Mubadala, which is the sovereign wealth fund of Abu Dhabi, invested in Aleph. And I think there's going to be a lot more done here. I think this is going to become an important part of the region. I've said publicly before also that I think this is going to be a gateway to the East. And I think the world is moving east in many ways. And the East should not be equated with China. There's India, there's Indonesia. For what it's worth, when I got on the plane in Tel Aviv this afternoon to come to Abu Dhabi, the guy next to me in line flashed an Indonesian passport. That was the first time I'd ever seen that in Tel Aviv. And so I think there's a lot opening up. And I think it's getting really interesting. And I think bringing together people of faith in positive endeavors is super important. And that should be a goal of all of ours, is to bring together people of faith in positive endeavors rather than in negative endeavors. And that's what I hope to do. Okay,
great. Thanks for sharing that. So talk a little bit about you're a father of 8 kids. What's the education for people, contemplating moving to Israel, making Aliyah? Tell us about the educational system in Israel. Has it changed? Are you happy with it, etc.?
Here's the most important thing I can tell you. Kids in Israel, I hope nobody gets offended by this, grow up more resilient because they deal with more uncertainty in everything. And my most recent book, which came out this week in Hebrew, called Chalav Dvash V'Ivadaut, Milk, Honey, and Uncertainty, chronicles Sefer Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, and how that is basically a blueprint for dealing with uncertainty in the promised land in Eretz Yisrael. And through all of the stories of Sefer Bamidbar and the mitzvot there, including the mitzvah of Challah, and the mitzvah of Nisachim and Maasrot and others. And so, and even Ir Miklat. And so I think that kids here are given responsibility at a younger age. So my daughter, who is 21, just ran the Yom HaZikaron Tekes for the whole neighborhood. And the Tekes was put on by kids who are 17. My son, who was 17, runs the whole youth movement there of 450 kids. And because the older kids are in the army, that's who's in charge. And so I think the most important education Israeli kids get, or kids growing up in Israel get, is how to be responsible for themselves, how to be responsible for others, how to take charge, and how to take a knock and navigate your way around things and be resilient. And it's a very uncoddled environment. And so I think that's by far, in my view, the most important thing. And then the army teaches you more of the same, how you got to be responsible and be resilient and be tougher and uncoddled. And I think it's how to work your tail off to get somewhere. And I think there's no supplement for those things, for hard work and resilience and then optimism. And I think the other thing about being in Israel is because of the uncertainty. If you're not optimistic, you go somewhere else. And I think that's the reason all these happiness surveys, whatever that means, happiness, Israel is consistently ranked near the top, because you have to live optimistically in this time. And so that's kind of the first thing. I think there's a second thing, which is because the world is on your calendar in this country, it matters a lot. You can more comfortably practice your Judaism in all aspects of it because the calendar resonates and the language resonates. And I think that's an important thing. And the formal education system, the rabbi asked before about MTA and MDS and Ramaz, et cetera. These are all private schools with admissions requirements and high tuition. And Israeli schools are public schools. So all of our kids went to public schools, public religious schools, or even Torani schools, but public schools with everything attendant to that. And it's a lot cheaper. It's a much more affordable education than I think you can find in the United States for a lot of people. And at the same time, it's got both the upsides and the downsides of being a public school system. And if your kid excels, you have all the opportunity to take advanced math. My 11th grader is taking very serious college level math in the 11th grade. And at the same time, it's a public school that takes in lots of kids from different backgrounds. And I think that integration is important because when you get to the Army, you're meeting everybody. And so it's important to have that. And so I think for a well-rounded kid, it's, one of the best places to educate a kid. And the informal education is as important as the formal education.
Great. So, there's been a lot of Aliyah recently. America, you can debate, is it on the decline or what's going on, but there have been some dramatic changes over the last few years, or maybe people reevaluated things through COVID. So you're involved with an organization that helps people with Aliyah. Can you talk about that, please? You started that organization?
I did. So we discovered through research that a lot of people who made Aliyah, particularly young people, went back to the US after their first job. And when you kind of interrogate the reason was they couldn't find their second job quickly. And the reason for that is they didn't have a professional network. We take it for granted when you grow up in the US, but if you go up on the East Side and you go to the Fifth Avenue Synagogue, you actually have a professional network. Somebody who knows someone. And if you went to college, wherever you went, you have a professional network because most of the people go on to jobs in variety of places. But if you're an immigrant, like I was 28 years ago, when I lost my first job, I didn't have a network. And you got a network and you're all alone. And if you're even an immigrant today and you didn't go through the military here, you didn't go to college here, you have a much better professional network in the United States or whatever your country of origin is than you have here. So that's the problem we set out to solve, was how to create a professional network for Olim. And so we started this program that during your first job in Israel, if you're an Oleh, and it's called Nevo, the Nevo Network, we give you professional education, professional networking, and an Israeli mentor. And so we've built out this massive network, both of Olim and Israelis, who mentor them, who are willing to help all these people. So we have, instant professional network, and that's helped people get ahead here much faster. Find the second job, which we already have a lot of data on, and even find their spouse and settle in. And it's just been unbelievably rewarding. The woman who runs it, his name is Abion, and she's just a star. And we have an all-star board of people both in the U.S. and in Israel who have been helping out and making this successful, and just an all-star cast of Israeli mentors who give hours a week of their time to help Olim integrate. And it's been unbelievably rewarding, and I think perhaps a game changer. And so if anyone knows someone making Aliyah in the tech world, look up navonetwork.org and reach out to us, please.
Great, thanks for sharing. So let's talk a little bit about
Jacob, if I can for a second,
please.
I owe that network to Rav Amital, because it's a lot about enabling 10,000 people to earn honest and decent living in Israel. And it's important to acknowledge that this is, all these people turn up to help and empower other people to, grow the pie and expand it and be a more welcoming society that can enable people to be successful economically. That creates a successful society. And I think that was Rav Amital's message, and I think it's what the Torah expects of us.
That's great. Thank you for adding that. So talk a little bit about the blogs and becoming an author. When did all of that come about, and walk us through that process? Please.
The blog I started a while ago, truth is, just to test out what blogging was like. I think it was like in 2005 or 2006. I was blogging for a long time. I tend to try things out when they start happening. And but the books, of which now I guess I have 6 books in Hebrew and 2 in English, started for the most part as table conversation, Shabbos table conversation with my kids, where you look at the Parsha or Megillat Esther, in which one of my books is, and you say, well, what's the Parsha saying? And what is the modern application of that? And so these things started as ideas around the business and the economy and everyday stuff. And as I began to look at the Torah and Tanakh more broadly, you realize that this was like real life. And if we believe these were real people who walked the earth, the truth is they all worked and they all had a day job. And it was involved in society, because otherwise it has no meaning. And they slept a little, and despite what the rabbis would have you believe, they probably learned very little Torah. And they worked, and they expressed our unique Torah values, or Jewish values. I mean, this is the Torah trying to tell us that it's a real blueprint for life. That's what the Torah means. It's a blueprint for life. And so you start to look at the story of Avram as an example, and you realize that the word rechush, possessions, is mentioned more than anything else. It's called in German a Leitwort, a leading word, milah mancha in Hebrew. And all the stories about Abraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov are about their business, right? And how wealthy they were, and they lost a fortune and gained a fortune in the case of Yaakov. And Yitzchak, basically started an agricultural enterprise, and he had a fight about it with the Plishtim. This was real life. And Yosef, the Torah spends 2.5 entire parshas talking about Yosef's economic policy. So much so that the Abar Benel asks, Rabbi Yitzchak Dan Abar Benel, who had to run away from Spain before the Inquisition, asks, why is this in the Torah? This belongs in the annals of Egypt. But the answer is, it is Torah, because the Torah is about real life and the real economy and real business. And so I started discussing this with my children, and then I took some notes, and then the notes became a WhatsApp group, and the people in the WhatsApp group says, hey, this ought to become a book. And so it became a book. And then a couple of the books even hit the bestseller list in Hebrew. And he said, whoa, maybe we're having a moment here where Torah and its application to modern society and modern technology matters. Some of you may have read Jonathan Haidt's recent piece in The Atlantic about social media and the Tower of Babel. That's something I wrote a blog post about in 2015. It was in the WhatsApp group in 2016. And then it is in the book in front of you, The Tree of Life and Prosperity. As well, I have almost the opposite take of Jonathan Haidt as to who the Tower of Babel is, but that's for a different point in time. And I think these biblical stories and metaphors have a ton to teach us in our modern lives. And this is not homiletics. This is parshanut. This is, what does the Torah actually say? I had a Christian scholar and businessman call me up a week and a half ago. He came to see me in Israel because of the book. And he said something really interesting. He said, this guy, by the way, has been published by the Harvard Business Review. He's a serious, unlike me, he's a serious guy. He said, because you wrote parsha after parsha and you treated the Hebrew Bible in order, it has the seriousness of parshanut, of exegesis, rather than homiletics. And I think it's important. This is what the Torah is about. It's legit a blueprint for economic life, which is most of the life. It's how we spend most of our waking hours. And so, you get inspired. You write one book and then you get a decent feedback. You say, oh, I got to do another one. And so now I guess I've become a little obsessive about it. But what I'm really obsessed about is the Torah. And I'm obsessed about the relevance of Torah to modern audiences. And it turns out not just Jewish audiences. Keith Raboy, who's a famous venture capitalist and amazing guy, tweeted out about the book that every entrepreneur ought to read this book. And so I think people are searching for what is grounding and meaning in modern day life, but also how do they navigate these stormy seas right now? And I think the Torah is just an amazing blueprint for that and has amazing relevance to our modern society and our life.
Wow, thanks for sharing that. So the Tree of Life and Prosperity, is that book more important than the others, or talk about that compared to the other ones? Is that an organization or?
No, it's so. Just to clarify, I've written in Hebrew on Breshit, Shmot, Vayikra, and Bamidbar, which came out 5 days ago. Bamidbar came out 5 days ago. That's in Hebrew. And I've also written on Megillat Esther in Hebrew, a book called Kacha Yaseh Layehudi. The Megillat Esther book and the Bereshit book have been translated into English and adapted. And in the Megillat Esther book is called The Vanishing Jew. And what it charts is Megillat Esther on an economic axis, looking at the economic prosperity at the beginning of Megillah, the financial crisis that ensues in the middle. Financial crises, let me help you out, always cause a rise in anti-Semitism, always. One should understand that the rise in anti-Semitism hitting the world right now is not just Jew hatred, it's also, that's the canary in the coal mine. It generally is fueled very dramatically by economic pressure on segments of the population. History has shown this. It's true before the Holocaust. It's been true in other times as well. And then in good economic times, we have mass assimilation of Jews. And the same thing happened in ancient Persia. And that's the story I chart through Megillat Esther, the assimilation in good economic times. If you read the first chapter of the book of Esther, even Chazal say it, which is that the Jews were punished because they partook of the Suda of Oto Rasha, the Suda of Achashverosh. That's assimilation. Same thing happens later in the book and throughout. And the economic crisis brings out the anti-Semitism. And in the Tree of Life and Prosperity, what I'm after is what are the economic stories in Sefer Bereshit, and how do they apply to modern times? So it's parshanut on the book of Bereshit, and then what's the application to modern times? So Noach, as we all know, he invented the plow. He also invented fermentation and chemistry and built an ark. Noah is the great innovator of Sefer Bereshit, but because he had no morals and ethics around his innovation, that only came with Abraham later. His innovation destroyed society and then later destroyed his family, which is the case of when he invented fermentation, drank wine, became naked in his tent, and was abused by his son. And his first invention, which uncorked prosperity, which was the plow, led to unbelievably licentious behavior and Hamas, corruption. Hamas means kind of a breakdown in trust in society. And when there was prosperity without ethics and morals, society broke down, and so on and so forth. I can go on. I compare Avram's negotiation of Marat Machpelah to the FBI's lead hostage negotiator, Chris Voss, who wrote a book on how to negotiate and showed how they have a lot of similarities to them. And the game theory of that negotiation, why Yitzchak had to change his economic model from being a shepherd to being an agriculturalist, and why Esav wanted to be more like Abraham and Yaakov was okay with Yitzchak, and that's why he got the blessing ultimately. Like I said, Joseph's economic policies, I could go on, and that's what I treat through Shmot, Vayikra, and Bamidbar as well.
Wow, that's very exciting. So one thing we didn't talk about, so you started out in politics, but it sounds like you didn't go back.
No, I started out in political consulting, and it's like I repented. Don't worry. As part of repentance is now I'm trying to do something productive.
So you're not involved in any Israeli politics at all?
Not to the best of my knowledge.
Okay. Tell some of the viewers. So it sounds like Israel is, flourishing better than ever. I'm sure COVID was challenging in Israel as it was in the States. Is there anything else, in Israel, specifically, for those thinking about investing in Israel, moving to Israel, visiting Israel, something specific going on now that maybe wasn't the last couple of years?
So I wrote this very publicly. I think Israel made two big mistakes during COVID. One is that we closed our borders to Jews the world over. I think that was a big mistake. I wrote it publicly. I took a lot of heat for writing it publicly in Israel for people who thought that this was irresponsible to let in variants of COVID, et cetera. But I think there are things that have spiritual and brotherly importance that are just as important as whatever the health concern was. And I think time has shown that we weren't able to get the health concern under control, just what's going on in China right now. And so that was, I think, one giant missed opportunity. And I think that was a missed opportunity to have people make Aliyah as well. And the second thing I think we should have done is actually target talent during COVID, much like Miami did. The mayor of Miami is a hero, the guy, Francis Suarez. He went out and just targeted talent and created a tech scene in Miami. I think we should have done that in Israel. I think that was a big miss. Like I said, I wrote about both those things publicly. I think all in all, though, our economy did really well during COVID. We've had record tax receipts, record economic growth. Now, like everyone else, we're about to have, or we already do have inflation. I think less so than, maybe significantly less so than in the U.S. But we're headed to an inflationary environment right now. And so, to answer the last part of your question, what I'll say is, if you're listening to this video or still with us after this 50 minutes, I'll tell you one thing: just come. Your kids will thank you for it. My wife tells our kids once a year that we made Aliyah so they wouldn't have to make the choice. I think our children and our grandchildren are incredibly grateful for that, and your children and grandchildren will be incredibly grateful to you too. It's a wonderful place to raise a family. It's a wonderful place to make a living. It's a wonderful place to be a part of the future of the Jewish people. And so, like I said, you got to be in it to win it. And I think you should want to come and be a part of it. It's where our future is.
So I'm curious, do you organize, I met you on that Eshatara trip, but do you organize trips for people to come visit? Are you involved in any organizations that are actively bringing people to come? Besides the network?
I think I probably speak to 40 to 50 trips like that a year.
Wow. Like Birthright, that type of stuff? Or?
I do a lot of, let's see, I've done a lot of universities, Princeton, Columbia, Stanford, University of Chicago, YU, Brandeis, Harvard, etc. I've done a lot of communities. I do a lot of Christian groups, generally Christian business groups, foundations, whatever.
Great.
My English is good, so they call me.
That's good. So tell us, because there's a famous question people always want to ask venture capitalists. Tell us the biggest investment that you passed on in the last 25 years. If you can't think of one, that's good.
No, I'm sure. I don't think about this issue much. One that I had a shot at that I actively passed on. It'll come to me. I'm
Okay,
sure there's
that's cool.
5.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's still pretty good. So it's incredible. What a great role model you are for what you do in Israel, both investing and encouraging people to go to Israel, and your books and your lectures. You're really an amazing role model. And I know you come to the States sometimes. We get to see you at Fifth Avenue Synagogue, and we love.
I even
when you
daven there sometimes.
Yeah, we'd love to have you for a Shabbos. We have a new building opening in September. So I don't know if you're able to come with your wife or your family, but we'd love to have you speak on a Friday night. So please let us know if that's possible. I'm sure you have family here to visit also, but it's
Not so much.
Not so much, really. Everyone's gone.
Everyone, everyone's moved to Israel. I came, and I have 5 other siblings. My parents came a couple of years after we did, and most of my siblings. I have one sister now in Los Angeles, but and one sister-in-law in Passaic. But everyone else has made Aliyah.
Wow, that's incredible. So you really started a whole thing in your family. But either way, we'd love to have you at Fifth
It would be an
Avenue
honor.
for a Friday night dinner. And I want to thank you. I know how busy you are and how much great work you're doing. So I want to thank you for all your time today, and wish you great Hatzlacha. And I hope to see you in New York soon or in Israel soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jacob. Yeah, thank you, Rabbi Babbage, and thank you to the people of Fifth Avenue Synagogue. Look forward to seeing you. Maybe even in September.
Okay, Mirz Hashem. Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.